How good is every mythic in Edge of Eternities? That's a question I'm going to be trying to answer for you today to help steer you towards whether or not the mythics you pull in your packs are worth your time, are worth getting excited for, generally are good or not. This is a bit more of an off-rip video. You're going to get my pretty honest, unfiltered opinion on a lot of these cards. I've got every mythic from Edge of Eternities here. This doesn't include the Precon Commanders, since I think Precon Commanders in general, you can simply build around to get the best out of them. These are your stock standard mythics you're going to pull from regular packs, and I'm going to assess whether or not I think they are playable or more than playable. The categories I've got here are pretty self-explanatory. The higher up you go, like any tier list, the more in demand the card is probably going to be. You've got your chase cards at the top, moving down to cards that are going to consistently perform at a very high level. You're pretty average to just generally solid mythics. Then as you go further down, you get to niche, narrow, cards that can do really well, but are going to have very specific things that they need to go or have to go their way. Some of these are going to be commanders or possible commanders that if you build a whole deck around, you're going to get great value out of, but I'm also considering how good they would be outside of just being a commander. And then the last tier is, I'm sorry tier. This is reserved for the cards that are just absolute dog water. There is always going to be a handful of mythics in every set that just do not click, and unfortunately this set is no exception. I'm going to start us off with an absolute banger of a card, as I always tend to with these. We're going to start off with one of the chase cards. Tezzeret, Cruel Captain, is our Planeswalker of the set. He also happens to be the only in-universe character, and Tezzeret, true to his name and history as a Planeswalker, is another very powerful, impactful Planeswalker. This is going to be our first chase card of the set, but I'll explain why in a minute. He has utility in a lot of formats, not just constructed. I think in Commander, at the very least, you can play him for 3 mana and go get a Soul Ring. Look, there are better ways to do this, such as Urza's Saga, but you're probably also aware Urza's Saga is a very expensive land. You can only run one of Urza's Saga in your deck too. Tezzeret is another way to do this. Outside of Soul Ring, and this is more geared towards constructed formats, Tezzeret's playability is entirely dependent on how many different targets you can hit with his -3 ability and how many artifacts you play. Those are generally the two things to consider if you want to run Tezzeret. Being colorless, he can go in any kind of deck. For example, a treasure deck in red could look to run Tezzeret, as treasures will just naturally increase his loyalty. You'll be able to pretty easily get his -7 just by simply making 3 treasures or artifacts in general, and then you can turn a treasure into a 3/3 every single turn. This is pretty similar to Goldwaker's ability, the alternate commander from the Mardu Precon from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. He was also able to animate treasures. Tezzeret is a bit more of a scuffed version of that, but being colorless and cheaper, I do think that has a home. Some of the other artifacts that jump to my mind that you're going to be looking for this. There is Enigma Jewel in Standard currently, which is a pseudo Soul Ring for abilities that I think is a great target for Tezzeret here. Enigma Jewel later can also flip and absorb Tezzeret's Planeswalker abilities. It'll probably mainly only do the untap artifact or creature one. This ability in general is probably his weakest ability, but again, it is better than nothing. Let's be real. Another artifact I can see Tezzeret enjoys grabbing is Altar of the Brood. This one is more suited to a mill-based strategy. I just think Tezzeret being able to tutor for the card you need. Keep in mind, it's also going to be an artifact that upticks him, so you might -3 him, but then immediately play your 1 mana artifact, putting him to 2 loyalty. Being a 3-drop, this is actually pretty good. If you've played Ral Crackling Wit as well, you'll know that the ability to uptick loyalty every time you do an action, in Ral's case, instant or sorcery, or maybe it's a non-creature spell actually, it makes him very tanky. Actually, he's very difficult to remove, and Tezzeret starts at 4 loyalty. This is going to be a pretty hard Planeswalker to remove on turn 3, unless you have hard removal dedicated for him. If you pull Tezzeret, I think you're going to be super happy. Being colorless, he's going to have a lot of homes, both in Commander and Constructed. I think he definitely qualifies as our first chase card. The next card I want to talk about is Tannuk, Steadfast Second. This is definitely one of the coolest creatures we've seen in red in a long time. For 4 mana, he will give all your other creatures haste, which is just a universally helpful ability, but then he also takes advantage of the new warp mechanic. Effectively, when he's in play, any artifact or red creature card in your hand has a cost of 3. The drawback of this is that cost, once you pay it, the creature comes in, it will only stick around for the turn. Him being able to give the creature haste as well means you'll be able to attack with it immediately. So I'd be pairing Tannuk with cards that are high mana cost that have really strong when this creature attack triggers. The one that jumps to mind is Overlord of the Boiler Bilgers, or as Saffron Olive likes to call it, Overlord of the Boiler Biggles. Let's say you play the Red Overlord, you'll deal 4 when the Red Overlord comes into the battlefield, you only paid 3 mana for it, then you'll immediately attack with it, deal another 4 to something. This is a standard legal thing you can do at the moment, and I think will be very powerful. I think he's a really exciting commander in his own right. I can't wait to slam Portal to Phyrexia for 3 mana, wipe the board, except for my own stuff. I do think that Tannuk has a lot of different homes and a lot of different applications. Tannuk is a little bit more narrow than Tezzeret, but I do think he will be consistently powerful. Definitely one of the funner commanders, in my opinion, you can be building this set, and definitely a card I won't be upset if I get. Let's go to the first planet. We're going to stay in red for this one. This is Kavaron Memorial World. You're going to hear this for all the planets. The Station 12 cost is really high. This is a tough cost to pay. The ability too, it's actually really weak compared to some of the other planets on this red one. There isn't too much to really say about Kavaron aside from, compared to some of the other planets, the payoff for the amount of effort you're going to put in towards activating that second ability is just not that good. You're going to make a 3/2 at the cost of your own land even. I mean, you can give your creatures haste for 2 mana too, but there's so much better ways than this. Arena of Glory in Commander and Modern, you just tap it with 1 red mana to give something haste. You don't have to get 12 station counters to make it go. Keep in mind, land destruction isn't that common, but one of the things you're going to have is occasionally you're going to work really hard to get this planet ready to go, and then someone's just going to demolition field it, and you're going to be so miserable you wasted all those turns trying to arm this one up. That's not to say all planets are going to be bad. I think some of them, particularly the ones with very powerful effects, have potential, but Kavaron here is going to be our first I'm sorry card. Again, profound apologies if you do happen to pull him. This, I guess, it's just not going to be in your favor. Next up, let's talk about Sami, Wildcat Captain. This one might get me a little bit of flack, but despite the fact it has affinity for artifacts, being one of the hands down most broken abilities we've ever seen in Magic the Gathering, this card is heavily weakened by the fact it is 6 mana. Double Strike and Vigilance is a pretty lethal threat. I do think if you do manage to get this thing out and have it survive to your next turn, you're absolutely going to pack a punch on someone. It does give all your spells affinity for artifacts, but you do require a lot of setup to actually take advantage of that. And at 6 mana, this card is prone to also just being shut down the moment it comes back in. By the time you get this out, your opponents have plenty of mana to play with that can completely dismantle your strategy. That's not to say Sami's a bad card. I do think she is going to be a bit more of a niche card, and I think she'll be a fun build around for Commander. I do think there's a Commander deck out there that's dedicated to playing Boros artifacts with her at the helm that absolutely abuses the fact she gives your spells affinity. You'll be looking to cast as many colorless spells as free as possible, such as a card we're going to cover next, which I think goes great with her, but I think she is restricted to simply being a really strong commander build around. Because of that limitation, she's not a bad commander, but I do think that makes her a narrow or niche card in this case. Next up, we're going to talk about that artifact I was referring to. It is the Endstone. This is a legendary artifact, meaning you'll only be able to have one of it in play in non-commander format. Having said that though, when you do get this thing into play, you are going to generate a lot of value and very quickly outscale your opponents. You may be daunted by the halving your life total rounded up at the end of your turn. Keep in mind, if you are below half your health, this will actually take you up to 20 in Commander or 10 in Constructed. It is a bit of a glass cannon card, but I think there's a bit of a skill test in this card to time it in a way where your opponent is running out of resources, might not be able to deal 10 or 20 damage to you. You play this and you will just run through them. They will not be able to keep up with what you do from this point onwards. You can play a land, draw a card. You can cast anything, draw a card. I think this card comes in as just the final haymaker that will just win you games. I think this is the kind of card that Sami, who I covered before, wants to get to 0 mana by having 7 artifacts in play. Very easy to do. I think the Endstone has a lot of applications. 7 mana is a bit more expensive, which will, I think, hold it back even a little bit. The best kind of decks will abuse that though. As I said, Sami will make it free. There's probably plenty of other creative ways to cheapen this card. I'm a bit reluctant to put it in chase card because of its power and potential barriers to its power, but I do think it's consistently powerful, and I suspect this will be the kind of card that could blow up a meta. We'll have to wait and see though. To our next colorless artifact, we have the Dominion Bracelet. This is a 2 mana artifact, so much easier to play. Gives a creature +1/+1. That's, I guess, all right. But its real effect will come in the secondary ability it gives the equipped creature. So for 15 mana, which can be cheapened, which we'll get to momentarily, you effectively control your opponent on their turn. This is Mindslaver. For anyone who hasn't seen that card before. Mindslaver is considered a bit of a faux pas in Commander, playing it and basically taking over someone's turn. It's very similar to Send Triplets, which is another card not universally liked by Commander players. Dominion Bracelet seems to me to be the kind of win condition, alternate win condition, I should say, for a big stompy deck. So you're going to be the kind of deck that has a 20 power creature that the Dominion Bracelet could be activated immediately on. That is going to be where you break this card. In Commander, effects that target individual players, generally powerful. They're great at shutting down one player, don't get me wrong. But the moment you do that, you put a massive target on your back that will just have everyone else at the table gunning for you. You might shut down one player, but there's two more guys who are ready to go and take you down, if not just because you ruined the fun of another player. In Constructed, I can't really see a world this sees a lot of play unless there is some sort of combo able to artificially crap out a massive creature suddenly, attach Dominion Bracelet to it, and then immediately activate its ability. There is a card coming up, I'll cover it next, that is a potential beneficiary of Dominion Bracelet, but I don't think I see it really working as a combo. I think that card has better uses, which I'll get to now. Overall, Dominion Bracelet, I think this falls into the narrow or niche category. Next up, we have Famished Worldsire. This is a 8 mana Leviathan. This thing is an absolute titan. It reminds me a lot of Cultivator Colossus from Crimson Vow a few years ago, being an expensive green lands matter type of creature. This one has Ward 3, pretty useful, but again, by the time you're playing this, your opponent probably has enough mana to circumvent that ward cost. Having said that, it still makes their curve a little awkward. The main thing this thing will do is come in and make you sacrifice lands. Now, you have to sacrifice at least one land, or this creature will explode as soon as it comes into the battlefield most of the time. Every land you sacrifice will give it 3/3 and allow you to go 3 cards deep and play any lands you find. Generally, when you're building a deck, a bit over a third of your deck is going to be lands. So statistically, that would round out to you're hitting 1 land for every land you devour. So lands are roughly going to replace themselves. Now, there obviously will be high and low rolls that come with this. But as I was alluding to earlier, this is the kind of card where you devour 5 lands, get a 15/15, attach the gauntlet that I just covered to it, and then immediately steal someone's turn from them. That's cute, but I do think the main thing that this will be used for is a way to trigger landfall. Let's say each devour land is going to be 1 extra landfall trigger. You'll play this and trigger landfall 6 times. That's enough to have Tifa turn into a 1-shot kill. That's enough for all your obnoxious landfall cards to trigger over and over again. This is definitely designed to be a landfall win condition. And as it turns out, landfall is pretty good right now. I think maybe landfall is a very aggressive deck right now, but maybe with more cards like this, there is enough room now for landfall to go a little bit more for the late game. And I think that does make this a pretty solid card. I won't put it in consistently powerful just because landfall's game plan already is pretty packed in Commander. There's a lot of great landfall cards to choose from. Cultivator Colossus that I mentioned earlier is one of them. But I do think our Worldsire here has a home in these kind of strategies. Either way, you'll be happy if you get him, that's for sure. Next up, let's talk about Exalted Sunborn. This is the next in what seems to be a growing trend of a new token doubler every set. Exalted Sunborn takes advantage of the warp mechanic, so you can get its token doubling effect for 2 mana once. That is actually really good. A lot of these warp cards have pretty iconic effects, like creatures dying deals 1 damage to each opponent. I think all of these cards are really good and will definitely see play in Commander. Exalted Sunborn is no different. It is an angel wizard. I don't think its creature type matters too much. Flying Lifelink is really great. It seems like 5 mana seems to be the going rate for a lot of these effects. The warp cost being able to cheat the token doubling cost is what really sells this card for me. I think you'll warp this card in on a turn you expect to make a lot of tokens, and then you can play it later and get the effect more permanently until the creature is removed. It being a creature is a weakness in this regard, because you are playing this card for its static ability to double tokens, which is why Anointed Procession is really good, but it's a token doubler. It's going to be super expensive, it's going to be super sought after, it definitely deserves a place on consistently powerful, because the decks that will abuse this are already really good with any token doubler. Next up, we have Susur Secundi, Void Altar. This is the planet in black, and this is starting to get a little bit closer to the kind of payoff I would look for in one of these kind of lands. You get to draw cards equal to a creature's power at the cost of 2 life. Again, the thing holding this back is how difficult it will be to station it consistently. 12 is a lot of power to throw in. Generally, consider this, unless you're in the late game and have already set up a bunch of creatures, you're going to have to take about 2 to 3 turns to set this up in the right deck. I think that is quite slow. Given the fact the payoff is, drawing cards, I think you would probably rather just run cards that sacrifice a creature and do this effect immediately, right? Just run an instant that does that. But If you do pull Sursus Secundi, it's a land. The floor for a land to be good is much lower, and I do think it has a place in, you know, a lot of black decks by sheer value of being a land with upside. It coming in tapped is a little drawback. That matters more in constructed formats than commander formats. But I think if you do pull this, you'll be pleased. It's probably a solid. It can't really be much higher than that, given the fact that what it does isn't necessarily unique, unlike some of these other planets. Next up, I want to talk about Dawnsire. This is a card that seems to be generating a lot more hype than I thought it would. I think people are very excited to try and get this to deal 100 damage to a stuffy doll or a screaming nemesis or something, basically to blow up an opponent. I think that is absolutely hilarious, and I cannot wait to see it, but admittedly is very narrow and very niche. That does probably mean it's more reserved to be a commander card than anything else. In constructed, it probably won't see play unless there is a very consistent, easy combo that this goes in. It's definitely a combo deck kind of card. I think it will be a really funny commander though, and I can't wait to see someone blow someone up with this. Pretty self-explanatory, but this is definitely a niche card. I don't think it will be an I'm sorry card. I think there's going to be a lot of people who are really happy to get this one, and I think there's a lot of people who will be willing to pay for this one, personally. Next up, I want to talk about Cosmogrand Zenith. Now, this card, I think, is the card I'm most excited for. This is a 3-mana 2/4, which is great stats. 4 health is very important. There's a lot of things that deal 3 damage very cheaply that people generally like to run in a lot of formats, commander included. Think of Lightning Bolt, for example. This dodges all that. And it has the text that might remind you of Corey Steelcutter, which recently got banned. When you cast your second spell, do a thing. In this case, you get a choice. You can make 2 1/1s or buff all your creatures. I think this is the exact kind of card that a lot of decks that run cheap 1-2 mana cards are going to want to run. Fits into so many token decks. I think it's very flexible, which is part of its power. And I think there's a lot of commander decks that quietly want this kind of card as a 3-drop that you get down early. You're just going to play 2 spells every turn, build an army, smash someone in the face. Think of its synergy with stuff like Warleader's Call, where you'll make 2/2s instead, which will also deal 2 damage to each opponent. I think there is a lot going for this card. The 1/1 counter can also target itself, so you can play this on turn 4 with a 1-drop, buff this card and the 1-drop, alternatively, but make 2 1/1s, then next turn buff them all. I think the flexibility of this card hides its true power level. I think a lot of people kind of glazed over this card, but I think this is the kind of card that will be quite sought after once set comes out and people start to realize how much of an overperformer this card is. This card is also going in our chase card tier. Definitely one I'm going to be hunting for 4 copies of. Next up, we're going to go from hero to zero, arguably. Weftwalking is a really shocking card. I'm sorry. There's going to be lots of people who get excited about this card. It looks flashy. Oh man, I play this enchantment. I return my graveyard to my library. I won't get milled anymore. And then I draw 7. You're paying 6 mana to do that, firstly. You can't cheat this card. You have to cast it. I mean, you can cast it for free and get the effect, but a lot of these kind of enchantments people like to reanimate or play in a cheaty manner that doesn't involve casting it. It's not necessarily that effect that's holding it back. It's actually the second part. It's omniscience, kind of. You get to play a free spell, but you don't get to play the first free spell, and that kills this card. It's a symmetrical effect that your opponent is going to benefit from first. You'll play this card, you'll draw your cards probably, you'll have a full hand, then next turn your opponent gets infinite mana for the first spell they cast. They'll just cast their biggest, meanest threat for free. You don't get benefit from it until your next turn. It doesn't even let you cheat this by playing an instant on your opponent's turn, being the first spell that you play. It has to specifically be on the player's own turn to be free. I think there is a lot of very conscious hoops Wizards have set on this card to stop it from being broken. And unfortunately, Weft Weaving is gotta be an I'm sorry card. I just cannot see that card working, unfortunately. As cool as it looks, there's just not a way that I think this card can really be broken. This is Quantum Riddler. This is a 5-mana 4/6 Sphinx. And like all Sphinxes of the past, it cares about card draw. Pretty well-bodied creature for what you pay. It also has Warp, and the text on this is a real doozy. So it's a cantripping creature, comes in, draws you a card. That's decent, but the real kicker here is that when you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand, you draw an extra card if you would draw a card. So if you played this with an empty hand, you would draw 2. which is pretty damn good. If you warp this for 2 mana to draw 2, I would say that's a pretty powerful effect. Is it good enough? This is a world where we now have Stock Up, which is 3 mana, draw 2, but arguably is better because you get to select the 2 cards from 5. But I don't think that's a point against Quantum Riddler here. The Riddler here has a really unique interaction with quite a few effects. So the thing I'm thinking of, let's say you play a card that says, discard a card, draw a card. You discard down to 0 or 1, you would draw, and it would trigger this. So it actually turns it into card positive. And there are a lot of creatures going around right now that do exactly this. Equally, if you have an empty hand, your draw a card, discard a card effects would also work. That's probably the more common thing in blue, but I think that does give Quantum Riddler an interesting niche. Now, if you cast an effect like Brainstorm with this, you don't actually draw 6 cards if you started with 1 or less cards in your hand, unfortunately. Quantum Riddler here only checks for each card you draw. So for Brainstorm, only the first card you draw would actually give you an extra card. So Brainstorm would become draw 4, put 2 back, which is still pretty good upside. The warp cost is definitely the saving grace for this card. Having said that, I think Quantum Riddler doesn't have an immediate home it belongs in, but I do see it as a pretty powerful and potentially really potent card draw engine in the right kind of deck. The kind of deck that wants to churn through its cards, discard 2, draw 2, stuff like that. And I think Quantum Riddler is the kind of card you preempt, so you pay 2 mana to warp it in, and then do the effect. I think for that reason, Quantum Riddler actually has quite a lot of solid potential. I'd put that in high solid. I do think it's the kind of card that could be powerful in the right engine. It will take a smarter person than me to figure that one out, though. Next up, we have a really interesting card in Ouroboroid. This is a 4 mana 1/3, which might seem like poor stats at first, but actually keep in mind that this card actually activates the turn you play it. If you play this pre-combat, you'll activate it and you'll put a 1/1 counter on at least this creature if you control no other creatures. Or, if you have a bunch of tokens, then we'll get +1/+1. And that's going to scale exponentially. The real kicker with Ouroboroid here is actually in strategies where you have static +1/+1s. So I think in Foundations, we got Anthem of Champions, which is a 2 mana, give all creatures +1/+1. This is the kind of card that goes exceptionally well with Ouroboroid, because then it would turn its buff into +2/+2 for everything. I think the fact that you can play it and immediately have it have an impact is pretty good. Cut Down is the kind of card that would absolutely eviscerate a card like this, but it's rotating out. And it has 3 life, soon to be 4, usually when it comes in, which does give it a little bit of bulk. I think Ouroboroid here has a definite home in a few go-wide strategies, or +1/+1 counter decks. I'll be putting Ouroboroid in consistently powerful. I think this card definitely will see play somewhere. I think it'll see play in a lot of strategies. Next up, we have the other green mythic. This is Evendo Waking Haven. Similar to the other planets, when you station it for 12, which is to put 12 counters on it, you'll get access to an ability that is identical to Gaia's Cradle. This is a non-banned card that is incredibly powerful in Commander. Pretty exciting effect to be getting. However, it is strongly gatekept behind that exuberant station cost. Now, I will say, of the planets, this one right here is my pick for the most powerful. Not because it strictly has the most powerful effect. I think there's one other planet that can contest it for that. But I think it's in the color that's probably going to have the easiest time activating Station. Green has plenty of creatures that have high power and low mana cost. So I'm thinking of the 3 mana 6/6 from Ixalan, the big dinosaur, Pugnacious Hammerskull. We just got that new mythic that devours lands and becomes a 15/15 or 12/12 and can immediately activate Evendo Waking Haven. And if you do manage to activate this thing early, you will reap the benefit of Gaia's Cradle, which is the kind of card that is on the game changers list for a reason. You'll absolutely run away with the game. Being a land as well, it's really easy to include in a lot of decks. And I think for that reason, actually, we're going to see Evendo as bottom of consistently powerful. I think there are many green decks here that we can just run it for free. In Constructed, it definitely has a lot less play rate. You're probably never going to activate its station cost unless you get to the late game, and by then you're probably not going to have too many creatures to benefit from. But I'm thinking squarely of Commander, where this card will be very sought after and very expensive, and I think because of the power it can bring to Commander, it deserves a place in the upper tiers. And while we're on the topic of good planets, let's talk about Uthros Titanic Godcore. This is the other planet that I think is very noteworthy. It's ability is the one that definitely rivals the green planet. This is Tolarian Academy, which is a banned card in Commander, if I recall. Uthros here has an absolute home in artifact decks, very clearly. I think it's a pretty easy include. A lot of artifact decks can be mono blue, such as with the infamous Urza High Artificer commander. I think Uthros here sees home in there. Artifact decks also are very good at making constructs, which are artifact constructs that gain power and toughness equal to the number of artifacts you control. I think 12 power toughness on a board full of artifacts is very doable and very easy to arm this thing. I think Uthros here is definitely a front runner for one of the better planets. I think the green just edges it out because it requires probably a little less setup to get going, but I think Uthros here definitely a strong contender. I'm going to put it right below the green planet. Next up, we have a pretty difficult one to evaluate. This is Alpharael Stonechosen. This is a 5 mana black mythic with a ward cost that's particularly interesting. This is forcing a player to discard a card at random. Now, normally discard a card ward costs are pretty strong, but they're held back by the fact that your opponent has some level of control over what gets discarded. In this case, though, they are completely at the whims of chance, which I think does work in this card's favor. The thing that will hold this card back is definitely its stats. A 3/3 for 5 mana is so vulnerable. 3 is a bit of a magic number, as I've alluded to earlier, where we've had other cards with 4 power, and I've been very pleased about that. Well, Alpharael is now vulnerable to your lightning bolts. In particular, though, Nowhere to Run will hose the hell out of this card. That is a card that removes and lets you ignore ward costs, making this just a 5 mana 3/3. In addition, Alpharael's Void keyword means that he has to attack to get the effect. Now, keep in mind, he doesn't have to deal combat damage. He only needs to attack, so there is some upside here to effectively halving someone's health. In addition to that, not only does he have to attack, but you do have to warp or have a non-land permanent leave the battlefield. Easier said than done, I reckon. It's not like you can crack a fetch and activate it like you could with Revolt from a few years ago. I think Void is a little bit of a watered down version of that. If you do manage to set up Alpharael, I think you're going to have a really good time. Obviously, these half-healthing effects have a lot of synergy with cards that deal double damage, so he joins that pile of cards. I do think his stats are just a little too weak, and I don't think he's a particularly interesting commander. Personally, being one color limits a lot of what you can run with him. That would be exciting. I think he compares in commander to Astarion a little bit, and I think Astarion's decks are far more interesting, far more fun. I'm going to put him in narrow and niche for that reason. Our other black mythic, Sothera the Supervoid, is far from narrow and niche. So this is a legendary enchantment that is the next in a line of black legendary enchantments that come in and take over the game. This will, in a commander game, almost certainly be controllable where you'll never lose it. So for context, if at the beginning of your end step, if there are no creatures, you sacrifice this thing. I think you will have a lot of control over this effect. There'll obviously be times where on your turn, there'll be no creatures and you won't have a creature in your hand to put down. But I think there'll be times where you can prime this thing, throw a board wipe down on your turn, not play anything, pass, and then immediately resurrect everything. And that is going to be so awesome. The exile effect too is very underrated. This gets around a lot of nasty stuff like indestructible. It stops the creature from going to the graveyard for your opponent to use later. The opponent getting a choice is definitely a little bit of a downside. Your opponent can choose to exile a token, for example, and you won't get a copy of that when the void gets popped. But the fact that the creatures also come in with +2 counters on them, I do think that makes this a pretty powerful card. I think this will be a consistently powerful card. Next up, we have our last planet in Mythic, and this is Adagia, Windswept Bastion. This is the white planet. Its Station 12 ability allows you to create a copy of an artifact or enchantment, except it's legendary. The reason this is important is because you will not be able to copy the same artifact or enchantment twice. You'll only be able to do it once. But I would say with the right enchantment or artifact, that is probably still good enough. I would say that this land is a tier below the green and blue planet in terms of power. Having said that, still a very powerful card if you do manage to get it to Station 12. You're probably not doing that till the mid to late game, I would say, unless you have the support of another color that plays a lot of high power toughness creatures, such as green. But I do think there's a world where copying the right enchantment definitely sets you up in a game-winning position. I'm thinking of stuff like Smothering Tithe. There's probably plenty more other choices, but I think this is a really solid card. Then lastly, we have Devastating Onslaught. This is a new token copier in red that makes temporary copies of something that can attack and die immediately at the end of the turn. This compares in my mind to a Simic card called Doppelgang. It has a little bit less of an X cost than Doppelgang, but the tokens don't die in the case of Doppelgang. There are ways to break this easily. Interestingly, you can copy artifacts or creatures with this, so you can make treasures, for example, and go mana positive if you have some other way to benefit from treasures, such as that novelist from Murders at Karloff Manor. I think the applications for this card are probably more in the vein of copying a threat that if you have multiple copies of, you win the game on the spot with. So I'm thinking of you copy stuff like Reckless Fireweaver, and then you sacrifice all your treasures to just win the game on the spot. Obviously, the more colors you're in, the better targets you get. I really like this as well in the Zergo deck, not the Commander Zergo, but the one from the main set of Tarkir Dragonstorm, the one that says warrior tokens can't be sacrificed. You can use this to copy any warrior that isn't legendary, and immediately at the end step, you'll be able to keep all those copies. And there's a lot of interesting warriors you can copy with this. Overall, I would actually rate this as a consistently powerful card. I think this is the kind of card that has a role to play and definitely will see a lot of use as a haymaker finisher. And that wraps up where I see the power level of the cards in Mythic Rarity for Edge of Eternities. There's definitely a few outliers here. Like I said, Tezzeret and the Cosmogrand, I think, are definitely the kind of chase cards that the community will be after. I think anything in the top 2 tiers really is the kind of card that you'll be very happy to see and will probably fetch for a pretty high price. There isn't too many poor cards, but I will say the gap between the niche cards and the chase cards is pretty wide. Compared to Final Fantasy, I expect the average cost of these cards maybe to be a little lower, probably close to Tarkir, but I reckon the chase cards themselves, especially if they're cards people want as playsets, will definitely fetch a high price. All in all, that's it for the video today. If you enjoy what I'm doing, let me know with a like and consider subscribing. If you want me to cover any of the rares and other rarities, if you enjoy this kind of content, let me know, because I am a bit on the fence on that. There's obviously a lot more rares than Mythic, so it'd be a lot more of a yap fest than this one. But if you do enjoy these kind of off-the-cuff videos, let me know. Cheers.